Hello YouTube, back with the next BattleBots review, and today I'm reviewing episode 12, which features Spin Orbiting Force versus Hazard, Ronin versus Dual, and Kilohertz and Voltar. Now granted, they weren't all the greatest fights at this point, but I mean Hazard versus Spin Orbiting Force at least definitely had a little bit of action. It was relatively even, so to speak, at least for a period. 'Cause, I mean, Spin Orbiting Force, had the ability to kind of sort of corral Hazard and kind of bring it to wherever it wanted. But of course, Hazard started to turn things around on its own by tearing out one of the motors that was actually kind of sort of crippled the Spin Force's weapon. The arm was moving, but I think the saw had actually come off. And I think his build wires had redundant motors, so he obviously, I think he was also stuck on the spike strip because he was not able to get off there. He was just the long sort of goalpost design was stuck under the spike strip just long enough, and then got free. It was kind of a really ingenious way that Spin Orbiting Force, dealt with the second time it was put on the spectrum. It was actually on top. It actually used the saw to kind of vibrate itself off the spectrum. That was probably the first time I had maybe ever seen that, or that may have been the first time that's ever been done at that point. Because we've seen it more nowadays, but because people have learned that's a thing you can do in the case of getting off the arena barrier, as it turns out. But Hazard ends up winning. I think it was 7-2. But it was mostly Hazard doing all the work because Hazard still had the wedge, and the weapon may not have been working as efficiently as it otherwise could have. They did enough damage to actually get the score. Now, Kilohertz and Voltar was a completely different story because Kilohertz by this point was hurting badly. They had suffered a lot of damage in their fight with Mauler. They had no axe. They basically had pretty much nothing to work with, and then the kill saws made it worse. They actually pulled down some of the armor. So basically, they had very little drive. I think they had a computer failure as well. So they were just definitely not. They were not doing too well. And Voltar kind of took full advantage, taking wherever they needed to go. I think Kilohertz barely survived by the end of that. They were hurting pretty badly, and unsurprisingly so. It was another dominant performance by Voltar, which later called Voltronic, of course. I think Ronin and Duo was kind of the similar story. Ronin was basically suffering radio interference. That's why they weren't really moving after they got stuck on the kill saws, and they moved right at the end. So obviously that's what the issue was. That was the same thing with Ice Wave and the modern BattleBots against Nightmare. They also suffered radio interference, although less likely then than it is now than it is back then. But up until that point, I think it was kind of anybody's game. They were both, I'd say, relatively evenly matched. Both didn't really have a weapon capable of causing any major damage. And Ronin actually had spikes to deal with Gidsu, but obviously they were not helping at that point. And I don't think they would have helped either way. I don't think they would have, if Ronin had not had those spikes, kept the spikes on for this fight, they probably wouldn't have mattered. They were still on the kill saw. They were probably still going to take damage anyway. Now, granted, not much, but Duo ends up racking the win, takes another win, which is kind of another unsurprising and not really all that eventful. Because once Ronin lost, couldn't get the signal anymore, it was basically stuck there, and then they were counted out. So I guess it was sort of the saved by the bell in a sense as a whole. So it wasn't a bad episode, but it could have been better, I suppose. At least we got one relatively decent fight out of it, Hazard versus Spin Orbiting Force. But yeah, that's my review on BattleBots Season 1.0, Episode 12. Thanks for watching.